That movie is like a biological weapon. It's against the Geneva Convention to stream it.
I said it before and I'll say it again. Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Never fear change. Life is too short for fear. Chase what is desired.
I can do this all day.
Would you mind identifying what you are?
We're the best friends squad.
That's what we call ourselves. Sort of like a team.
Welcome to the rodeo. Ladies and gentlemen, please sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride.
This is the way.
I have spoken.
Welcome to the Skiffy and Fandy Show, Torture Cinema.
The most incompetent grant administration on film since the Wild Wild West.
Oh, we're going to come back to that for sure.
Woo!
I'm Sean.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Paul.
And we're here today for Torture Cinema to talk about 2010's Jonah Hex. Ooh.
Oh,
He
boy.
can talk to the dead. Ooh.
Which is not in the comics.
No, it's not. There's a lot of things in this that aren't in the comics. But, you know,
I have not read the comics.
We'll get to that.
honestly, once you find out what the comics set up this character for, like how he's set up, you'll be a little bit annoyed that this movie didn't have the cojones to actually follow that narrative. Yeah, so we're here for Jonah Hex. Our Patreon supporters voted for this on a poll of terrible superhero movies, and they had many options, and they chose Jonah Hex as the primary one. I'm very disappointed that you did not choose the David Hasselhoff Nick Fury film, which I have seen, and is absolutely banana pants bonkers, which is why it is just a delight to watch. But you picked Jonah Hex because I guess you wanted us to be mean to DC today, which is definitely what's about to happen.
DC and its continued inability to make a superhero film that isn't absolute garbage.
They so struggle. They're
trying
like...
so hard, and yet they cannot do it unless Christopher Nolan is in charge.
It is. Well, in any case, we're here to talk about Jonah Hex, so we will be doing that while commiserating about DC. But before we get to that, we got to talk about what we're drinking, because normally we have some form of a beverage, occasionally alcoholic. And so, Alex, we'll jump to you. What are you drinking?
So, I'm starting my podcast off with a glass of cherry truffle cider from the Meriwether Cider Company in Boise, Idaho. It's quite delicious. And then I will be finishing it up, or following it up rather, with a can of Galactic Cowboy Imperial Stout from Left Hand Brewing Company, which is a nitro beer. So
that sounds delightful.
What is a nitro beer?
So it's got the bubbles in it are nitrogen instead of carbon dioxide, so it's much tinier bubbles and it doesn't foam as much.
No, that's completely inaccurate, Alex. I know for a fact that you have seen the Fast and Furious franchise. You know the correct answer to this. The nitro is actually...
So actually what you do is I take this can, and there is a little switch on the bottom that I flip, and then I go about 50 miles an hour faster.
Correct.
And flames shoot out of my butt.
Yeah, that's precisely how this works. That's how Alex ran a marathon last year. Totally,
exactly.
Just nothing but nitro beers.
It was like, remember that scene in Kung Fu Hustle? That was me running with flames shooting out of my butt.
I didn't think Kung Fu Hustle could be improved because it's a delightful movie, but adding flames shooting out of the characters, but as their feet are running like a Speedy Gonzales. Yeah, that's an improvement, I gotta admit.
Yeah. Well, perfect. Well, thank you, Alex, for telling us what you're drinking. What about you, Paul? What are you imbibing at the moment?
I am just imbibing, since it's a work night for me and tomorrow is more work. I am just imbibing some iced tea, but I also have a slice of my freshly made from my deceased mother's recipe pumpkin bread, which actually came out okay.
Yes! I believed in you!
I just had to refrigerate it to make it work afterwards.
Yeah, you gotta let it cool all the way.
I had to let it cool all the way down, and now it's tender, and now it's tasty, and I am happy. It's not perfect, but it's good enough.
All right. Well, as for myself, I attempted in a very short amount of time to make kind of like an apple cider hot toddy, but I forgot that I actually have rum. And so I put vodka in with an Angry Orchard with a cinnamon stick and some nutmeg. And pouring the rest of the Angry Orchard did help. But before, it was not good at all.
Oh dear.
Dear.
It hurt going down. Let's just say that. But it's a little better now that there's more apple cider than vodka. So
that would help.
Yeah. But yeah, so I'm going to be slightly messed up. So this is going to be good.
Well, we had to watch this movie, so we're already off-footed anyway.
Well, I watched it twice, so...
Sean, I just want you to love yourself, baby.
I just wanted to understand this movie.
There is nothing there to understand. In fact, this is actually a good moment for me to move into the summary so I can explain to the listeners why there is actually nothing in here to understand.
All right, go for it.
Perfect segue time.
Jonah Hex is a movie that is an hour and 21 minutes long, including the credits, though actually according to the Microsoft Xbox Store, it's an hour and 22. Whatever. And it is a movie that either needed to be longer so that there could be, I don't know, character development, ? Or needed to be shorter because there was not actually any there. It is the story of Jonah Hex, who is a guy in the Confederate Army during the Civil War, and I think we'll probably talk about some of the Civil War stuff later because, boy howdy do I have some opinions. And he's just like, well, I wasn't a bad man, and then one day, by the way, Jonah Hex is played by Josh Brolin, who is trying his hardest, bless his heart. One day, he got some orders that were really bad, and so he didn't take them, and it ended up getting his best friend killed. It's very non-specific and weird, and you're not sure what's going on, and it kind of gets explained later. And then you find out that the best friend he got killed was the son of John Malkovich in a bad wig, who plays General Turnbull. And in revenge, General Turnbull murders Jonah's family in front of him, and Jonah is super upset and, like, almost dies, but is kind of resurrected by a mystical Native American rite. More on that later, too, I'm certain. And he decides to just go be an asshole and be a bounty hunter because Turnbull fakes his own death. He's just kind of an asshole and a bounty hunter, and then Turnbull shows back up and is like, I'm going to destroy the United States on its 100th anniversary with this bullshit weapon we made up. And there is a President Grant who is...
designed by Eli Whitney, of all people. Poor Eli Whitney's estate, it must be screaming.
Yeah, and President Grant, who is played not nearly as well as when Kevin Kline did it in Wild Wild West, is very concerned, and for some reason decides the only person who can take care of it is Jonah Hex. So Jonah Hex is super mad when he finds out that Turnbull is actually still alive, and then he goes and hunts him down. And also, for reasons that I still don't understand, Megan Fox is in this movie as a prostitute, but it's still not the worst thing that's ever happened to her because that would be the Transformers franchise. In the end, Turnbull gets defeated, and Jonah Hex is like, I'm gonna go do other stuff, and rides away.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Well, okay, so we could go on this long conversation about the wonders of the DCEU and the films that preceded it, but of course, we're here to talk about Jonah Hex, and so we must get to our first likes, and that goes to Alex. Alex, your first like, please.
My first like is that this movie is only 82 minutes long.
That's it?
That's it. It's short.
Period, end of
very
story.
Short.
Wow.
In a technical sense, it was actually still longer than it needed to be for the amount of plot that was in the movie. But I appreciate the fact that they decided to tell us about their lack of plot in 82 minutes instead of 152 minutes, which is, kind of more common in torture cinema stuff. In fact, I think this might be one of the shorter torture cinema movies we've ever watched, except maybe Damnation Alley.
It's pretty short, and for the kind of film that this is meant to be, it's shockingly short. This is meant to be like a blockbuster film. This is supposed to have like meat and potatoes. It's supposed to have like a big, fanfare and all of that. And this film feels to me, it feels like it's like 10 years too late.
Yeah. I was actually really surprised that this was a 2010 movie.
Right? It doesn't feel like it. It feels like it comes from they made this movie the same year they made Wild Wild West. Like, that's what it feels like. And this is the worst film.
Yeah, and then Wild Wild West was 99, so yeah. The movie could have been longer, but it compresses all of Jonah Hex's backstory into that short little comic scene of 2 minutes where he dumps 15 minutes worth of plot into there, or tries to. Or just explains to you. So, I mean, if that had actually been actual movie footage, the movie could have been longer. And I just checked, Damnation Alley is 91 minutes, so this one's shorter.
Okay, this one's actually shorter than Damnation Alley.
This definitely feels like a film that, despite its main plot line being really simple, it has moments where it just seems like it jumps ahead really quickly instead of at least focusing on character development, which is like I find that really frustrating. Like, there's this moment in the middle where he gets shot a bunch and he gets rescued by Native Americans again, and he just like gets up from his chair and goes, "Jim Turnbull!" and just yells his name, and then it's like him like riding in the sunset like fucking Ghost Rider. It just jumps. It like leaps to this conclusion without necessarily building any of those components up to get us there. And even still, like some of the plot points, like for example, Irish Magneto, who basically steals, he kidnaps Lila, and that plot point doesn't really have a resolution. It just sort of, she appears for a moment, and it's like, oh, we got her, and it's like, but he's not going to rescue her. That's not why he's there. So why, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I was frustrated at times. Like, okay, so you have this thing and you don't use it as a plot point because, spoiler, Magneto dies. When even telling Jonah Hex that he had kidnapped her, and we just find her later in Turnbull's clutches. It's like, so you set up this whole little subplot with the dragon and don't pay it off in any particular way. It's like, no, that's not how movie storytelling works, guys.
Also, I just need to correct you. It is Irish Magneto. That is his official name in the IMDb.
Okay, Irish Magneto. I apologize.
Yeah.
I will say, like, when I was kind of like looking, desultorily looking up stuff about this movie as I was watching it, because there wasn't a whole lot going on, I saw that kind of like the reception, everyone was like, oh, it's incoherent and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I know what incoherent looks like because I've watched some fucking incoherent movies for torture cinema. This one was perfectly coherent. It was just boring and didn't have a lot to say. I mean, I guess you could say there was an incoherency in like, why is Megan Fox even here? But
yeah,
like the plot was actually sensical in as much as there was a plot.
I mean, we get a kind of character drive in that we find out that Jonah Hex's wife was Native American and was killed by Turnbull, and we used to see the burning of them in the homestead, which kind of reminded me of The Patriot, in some weird way.
Yeah, kinda.
It's but Turnbull has a thing for killing civilians throughout this entire movie, often by fire. He's like a little pyromaniac general that we got who likes to burn people alive, apparently. But which I think we're discussing on this at the time, which kind of makes me think of John Carter. So when you drop Megan Fox into this movie as not even much more than eye candy and without any really connection to the whole plot, and she gets shoehorned in, it does just not work. It's like either develop her as a character or just leave her out entirely. I mean, were they trying to sell tickets by having Megan Fox in the movie in a prostitute stripper outfit?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the answer to that is yes.
Okay, well, given the box office, they failed in that approach.
Part of the issue I have is, like, I agree with Alex, like, in terms of the story being coherent, it is a coherent story. Like, you can follow it from start to finish. The biggest problems seem to be that, like, it doesn't want to develop really any of its things. It's like throwing them out there, like, oh, this character has this thing, and this character has this thing, and this character has this thing, and Megan Fox is here looking hot, and like that's it's just kind of there, but it's not. They don't really say like what is the central the metaphor or the theme or the issue that we want to develop, and let's develop that more. And the film doesn't seem to want to do that. It just sort of wants to get to its conclusion. I would argue, based on Alex's get to the conclusion reasonably quickly for a blockbuster, and just get there and be done with it. And that, I think, makes this not as good a film, because it doesn't think about those bigger consequences, which I realize we're just trashing the film right now in what's supposed to be the likes.
Yes.
I mean, that's it, but you are correct that it has no interest in character development, and it has no interest in theme. It really is just like, and the reason the movie can be as quick as it is and still tell what is technically a complete story with a beginning, middle, and end is that it is basically like they took, you know, the 3x5 note cards that were the outline for where a script should go, and they just filmed those scenes and strung them together and were like, well, there you go, we made a movie. And you're like, okay, well, at least it didn't take that much of my morning up. You know, I had a cup of tea, I ate some toast, I sat there with my cat. He was actually kind of mad because I got up sooner than he thought I would, so it really didn't disturb my life too much, and I can like that about it, because I would have been way more pissed if it had been like an hour longer.
It's still shocking. An hour 21 minutes is really, really short, even in 2010.
Well, I actually just went and I was like, what other really short, you know, kind of short torture cinemas? This movie is shorter than Mac and Me.
Oh, that's wild to me. Because Mac and Me has a really ripping plot. It just moves, that movie.
Oh.
Well, okay, so I think we've hammered the short runtime and some of its problems and benefits. And so we'll jump over to Paul. What is your first like, Paul?
So I will say that the Louisiana Board of Tourism and provided lots of lovely scenery and architecture and set pieces for this movie, including the fictional Fort Resurrection and lots of Louisiana Bayou. I mean, I will get to geography probably my dislike, but the actual terrain and what we see and that nice fort we have, one of the set piece battles in, is all lovely filmed and lovely places to visit, and I would love to see and photograph them. So what we see looks good, but we never stay in a place long enough. I mean, even the little western town at the beginning of the movie has that very convincing South Dakota, very clapboard, slapped together sort of town in the middle of nowhere, where he has his confrontation with the treacherous, quote, sheriffs. It feels right that those towns were that kind of ramshackle, and I like that. The movie looks and feels good. I mean, even the crappy super weapon looks interesting. I mean, these energy balls that apparently explode things. At least it's an interesting looking super weapon, and we see him firing the gun on the Capitol. It's like, and while I have big problems with how the U.S. Navy handled the confrontation, at least
What U.S. Navy? What are you talking about? There was one ship.
yes, the U.S. Navy.
The one whole Navy.
Yes, one little ironclad.
It wasn't even a full ship. It was like they just put a piece of metal in the water and had people stand on it.
one ship, and it went kaboom pretty fast.
They were on a budget.
But yeah. So I appreciate the visuals in this movie, for as short as this movie was, as Alex pointed out. I mean, maybe if they lingered longer, then the cinematographer would have screwed things up, but we didn't stay in anything long enough to hate it. I mean, even as it was not much of a plot, I kind of like the visuals of the quasi half in, half out world that we see him falling into now and again, where he's fighting Turnbull. I don't know why they feel the need to do that when he was actually fighting him in real life, but at least looked fighting basically in a quarry. So I felt Doctor Who vibes when he was fighting Turnbull in the quarry in his mind. So, you know, that felt good too.
I will say that I did like the visual of the sort of like that red clay kind of dirt that's in his, I guess, visions or whatever you want to call those.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like Louisiana dirt.
Yeah, and it was, I liked that visual, especially like the image of his face when his eyes open and he sort of comes out of it. Like that was a pretty neat visual. And there is some cool stuff they do with crows, which I think, you know, I like crows.
I like it was competently shot.
It was competently shot. I mean, I'm stretching here a little bit, but you know, I had to find something like about this movie.
Yeah, I'm right there, and I took the easy one.
Yeah, fair. But I guess that means we got to come to me for my like, and I think folks will have already figured it out, because it is, in my opinion, the only good thing about this movie, which is the dog.
Aww.
Because
Dog
he
is
meets
cute.
this dog that he basically like rescues and becomes his friend. And for a brief moment, I was filled with such immense joy that we were going to have Josh Brolin with his messed up face prosthetic having conversations with his dog that he just met, and it was just going to be these snarky conversations. The dog would talk back a little bit, and they would just kind of like, that was going to be his one big relationship. He was just gonna be friends with this dog, and he'd be this gruff, like, Western dude with all of the burns and everything, and this dog would be this loyal dog, and it'd be his best bud. And then he, the dog, and the horse were like, that was gonna be the story. And that it wasn't gonna be Megan Fox, it was gonna be him and the dog. Like, maybe the Irish Magneto steals his dog, and he's like, I ain't taking that shit. I'm gonna fuck you up.
That's very John Wick of you to think.
I mean, to be fair, the dog had just as much character development as Megan Fox.
True. But the dog was so cute, and the second it showed up, I was like, oh, please let this be what this movie's going to be from now on, please.
I also will say, I feel like the dog was actually phoning it in a lot less than Megan Fox. I feel like the dog was actually happy to be there, and Megan Fox was not, and I hope she fired her agent after this movie.
Well, Megan Fox, I will say, considers this to be her worst film, which is interesting. I will also say that it's interesting you say that the dog seemed to be not phoning it in by comparison and was happy to be there, because the dog had to spend an hour in a makeup chair to get its, like, mongrel look.
Yeah, and it looked, I mean, it just looked like it had stuff that got dripped. I don't know what they were doing to that dog's fur. It did not look good, and it was totally unnecessary.
It was. They could have just been whatever breed that dog is, and I think they would have been fine. I just love the dog. There's this moment where you just really think that this is going to be the story, and he names his horse. Like, they ask him what his horse's name is, and he just says, it's horse. And I was just like, please name the dog Dog. But he just looks at the dog and he goes, I don't even know what to say to you. And then he walks away. And I was like, this is great. I want more of this. This is what I want.
Yeah, he has more character chemistry with the dog than any other character short of Turnbull and the Sun. And those are questionable too.
I don't know. Like I said, I felt in this movie, like, Josh Brolin was trying. He was trying really hard.
He wanted this movie, clearly. More than most everybody else in the film.
And I feel like him and the dog were the only ones who were trying, because, like, when I realized that was John Malkovich in a bad wig, I was like, okay, we are in for a ride here, because I ain't ever seen a movie where John Malkovich was not, like, gnawing on the scenery, and I don't know, like, what drugs they gave that man every time they were gonna film a scene with him. He was just, like, absent.
He was Xanaxed, yeah.
Yeah. I was just like, John Malkovich, what did they do to you?
So I will just say this, on the subject of Josh Brolin apparently really wanting this role, I don't think Josh Brolin wanted this role nearly as much as Thomas Jane.
Who?
Because Thomas Jane showed interest in this role so much that he took pictures of himself in costume, complete with makeup and everything, to recreate the facial scarring of the character. He wanted this role really badly. And he did eventually get to play him in an animated short, but yeah, he wanted this role and wasn't considered for it.
That's sad.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I forgot the name of the actress, who really wanted to play Catwoman, and she's really dressed up in the role and went all out and didn't get the role. I forgot the actress who did that.
Well, whoever it was probably was more interesting than when Halle Berry did it, which is a torture cinema film we have yet to do, because it's never available to stream.
Thank God.
I mean,
that's
because that movie is like a biological weapon. It's against the Geneva Convention to stream it.
Yeah, very true. Well, okay, I think we're struggling with likes, and I think that means that we have to turn over to our dislikes. And so, Alex, what is your dislike for this movie?
So there are a lot of things, and I do want to talk about, like, you know, comparing this to our other two Wild West torture cinema films, because I feel like that is also a fruitful conversation. But my number one dislike that just fucking haunts this film is, okay, they made a movie about a ex-Confederate, whatever rank he was, because he was more than a soldier, obviously, versus an ex-Confederate general. And they go almost the entire movie without ever fucking mentioning what, you know, the whole reason the Civil War was fought, as in slavery. There is, like, only one black person in the entire movie, and he is there for this incredibly fucking awkward scene that just is, like, randomly out of nowhere, because I think they got to the point where they were like, wow, we're, like, halfway through this movie about former Confederates, And maybe we should explain to modern viewers why Jonah Hex is not a terrible person, even though he fought for the Confederacy. So we're going to have him go talk to a black man so the black man can absolve him of this by being like, oh, I know you weren't into slavery, Jonah. You just didn't like being told what to do.
Yeah, he was almost like a Negro sin eater for Jonah Hex.
Yeah, I was just like, what is this? Well, and then, I mean, I will mention, like, the only other time slavery is mentioned in the entire movie, which again is about a bunch of ex-Confederates fighting each other, is when they mention that General Turnbull had Mexican slaves, which I was just like, where the fuck were they? But okay.
Yeah, that's like, what?
Yes, and they called him the terrorista, and I was just like, what?
Oh yeah, the terrorista.
What is this fucking movie? And like, because you could tell, I was just like, they spend the entire movie trying to not have this conversation at all because they know it's fucking awkward. And then they make it as bad as it can possibly be.
So, let me tell you about Jonah Hex, the comic book character, and you will probably be even more annoyed about what this film turned out to be.
Oh dear.
So, Jonah Hex, the comic book character, was originally sold into slavery to an Apache tribe, and eventually gained their respect. There's stuff that he did to gain their respect and sort of became like an official member instead of being quote unquote a slave. I'm sure slave in that context means something a little bit different than what we're talking about.
It's different from like the system of chattel slavery as it was practiced in the South on black people and Native
Precisely.
Americans.
But that does come in later because he did originally intentionally join the Confederate States Army, and he was a lieutenant, blah, 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 and he was close friends with Jeb Turnbull, which we get in this story, but later on, when the Emancipation Proclamation is declared, he realizes, I'm not comfortable with slavery. I don't like this slavery thing, and I can't do it. I cannot be part of the Confederate States because they support slavery. I'm out. And so he basically leaves, and that's how the conflict happens, is it's him trying to stop the existence of slavery and fighting against his former compatriots on the subject primarily of slavery. So the comics actually deal with this. And I'm not suggesting that they deal with it perfectly or anything like that, but it's explicit. It's explicit that this is part of his reason for why he left the Confederate States, is he was never comfortable with slavery, and he eventually had to shift his loyalty because he couldn't handle it. This film, as you said, Alex, does everything it can to completely avoid that conversation. Even when the black characters show up in the story, it still doesn't want to talk about it. It does everything it can. It's like struggling to get around it. It's this elephant that's in the room, and they're trying to like climb over it constantly. And it is super frustrating because to me, it feels like this film basically wimped out. It wimped out.
Oh god, hardcore. Fucking hardcore.
Yeah, as you said, it didn't want to have the conversation. Yes, we'll have a couple of black characters, and they're going to Washington D.C. because they're proud to be Americans, and now we're free. And
yeah,
and yet here you have Jonah Hex running around in an old Confederate uniform, fighting another Confederate general, and yeah.
And I will note too that in the comics, Jonah Hex is more like a Punisher figure, in that he goes after. He basically protects the innocent. That is his moral code. He's not always liked by everybody because of his methods, but his moral code is he protects the innocent. In this film, we see him effectively protect the innocent, but he's basically hated by everyone because they all think he's an evil bastard.
Yeah, I mean, he gets a bounty on his head.
Yeah.
He's a bounty hunter, and he gets a bounty on his head. He's an anti-hero at best.
Right.
Like, I will say, like, I mean, it makes me extra mad to know what could have been, because, like, they could have easily, like, they had plenty of runtime to play with. They could have easily incorporated that backstory from the comics, and it would have made him, like, a much more interesting character where you would have been like, I understand where his moral standing is.
Right.
But what they did, like, when they weren't just trying to pretend, like, you know, not even talk about the Confederacy, it was all very much like Lost Cause narrative, which just made me so angry. I was like, in fucking 2010, you're doing this? Okay, assholes. And then I'm just thinking about, like, okay, I'm gonna read the quote of, like, the non-specific bullshit garbage that Jonah Hex starts this movie with, where like it took me probably 20 minutes into the film before I realized that he was actually a Confederate, because they were so like trying so hard not to go there. So okay, first lines. War and me took to each other real well. It felt like it had meaning. The feeling of doing what you thought was right. But it wasn't. Folks can believe what they like, but eventually a man's gotta decide if he's gonna do what's right. That choice cost me more than I bargained for. What the fuck is that?
It's pablum.
I mean, it
Yeah.
is. It's total pablum. It is just like, they're trying so hard to be like, he's doing what's right, but we're not actually gonna clarify what is right because we don't want to mention, I don't know, the fucking, like, entire system of chattel slavery that destroyed countless lives and tortured people and killed them, and maybe he was uncomfortable with that? Like, what the shit is this?
Yeah.
It's just mind-blowing what they did to try, and you're, because of this, like, wishy-washiness, I was sitting there going, I don't know what this dude's deal is, because then later on they're kind of like, oh, he had a falling out because, like, the general wanted him to burn down a hospital or something, and I was like, where the fuck was he that he was gonna burn down a hospital? Whose hospital? They don't even fucking say.
Yeah, and this is the conflict that he has with Jeb, right? When he meets Jeb,
Yes.
or as I like to
Right.
say, Dean and Sam's father. That the conflict is like he had to kill him because he didn't follow orders, and he was like, I can't do it, and he had to kill Jeb. In the comics, Jeb is a Confederate, and Jonah actually surrenders to the Union. He's like, I can't do this, and the Union tries to pressure him to give up where Jeb and the rest of his Confederate friends are, and he's actually reluctant, and he doesn't want to, and they eventually get captured, and he gets like tricked into basically helping Jeb escape because he doesn't want them to necessarily die either. He just thinks they're misguided, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And it all turns out to be a Union trap of like, we invented this idea that there's this escape tunnel so that they could use the excuse to shoot Jeb and all of them as though they're fleeing prisoners, right? We're shooting fleeing prisoners rather than having to take them and actually deal with the normal rules of engagement, right? When you take prisoners of war and they have to be treated in certain ways, blah, 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 blah. Or at least supposedly. I don't know what it was like in the 1860s, whatever. And that's like the story of what his relationship with Jeb is that Jeb is actually his friend, and he tries to make sure that his friend doesn't get killed. Presumably, I guess the comics might deal with the idea that maybe he hopes that he can talk his friend into not supporting this institution anymore. I don't know. But that's the story. In this, it's like, no, he shoots him because over the hospital. It's like, well, that's like, that works, I guess. Like, I'm not going to follow the order and kill a hospital, but it doesn't have the same weight.
Like, they never even explain why he would need to shoot his friend because of this. Especially because when he does resurrect Jeb, you're like, this does not seem like a guy who'd be like, oh yeah, bitches, let's go burn down a hospital.
He doesn't, right? At all. He helps him. Like, it doesn't make sense as a character. It's like, but he seems pretty chill, actually, all things. Maybe it's because he spent all that time in hell after Dean and Sam weren't able to save him from the yellow-eyed demon, but I don't know. Like, it doesn't feel like a character that at one point was like, oh yeah, fuck a hospital. We don't need to have any rules of engagement. You just shoot that shit. That doesn't. There's a lot of this film as it just takes shortcuts to get to whatever the next plot piece is, and this is one of them. That your whole dislike, Alex, is one of them. Like, this film could have been, at least had the moral courage to actually present that this is a moral question about slavery, so that when we get to this one random black character who happens to supply him all his weapons, maybe you make that character more significant.
Like, I feel like a lot of the lack of plot is just kind of laziness, but this is the one where you're like, no, this is abject cowardice. And I just want to, for a moment, just draw the comparison right here between this movie and Wild Wild West, which is by no means a good movie.
No.
But it takes place in the same time period and deals with the same issues, like ex-Confederates wanting to blow up the Union while Grant is president. And I am not saying, certainly listen to that podcast. That movie got some problems, but it at least is like, so the Confederacy believed in slavery and that was bad. Like, it had the moral courage to say that, unlike this movie.
Slavery is bad. Wow, what a stand to take.
Right?
Well, I mean, the characters have conversations like about it. I mean, they're sarcastic, snarky conversations, but it's omnipresent in the story. You can't ignore the fact that Jim West is a black man in that story, because so many of the white people he meets are, effectively Klan members. I mean, they may not literally be members, card carrying, but they could be. I mean, he almost get hung at one point in the story.
Yeah, like, Wild Wild West is not shy about being like, these fucking white people were racist as shit.
Right.
Like...
And that's not even controversial.
Is apparently, like, not a thing in Jonah Hex, which is, like, was made more recently, when the United States reformed into Wokistan. Like...
It's so strange to me because it's not actually controversial. People in the 1860s were racist.
Yeah!
I'm just like, to me, it's like, I don't understand where the moral cowardice is actually coming from here. This is just a period of time. Like, nobody would say, 1860, like, we were totally woke back then. That's not a thing anyone would say about the 1860s.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it's, even back in the 1860s, there were people who were like, wow, hey, slavery was bad, etc., etc. And, like, they didn't even manage that level of, like, they were just like, we're just not going to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even the example of the crooked politician that they have as part of Turnbull's.
Oh, the whiskey
whiskey
guy. Yeah.
Yeah, the whiskey guy. Like, they don't even have, like, the courage of saying, like, well, maybe he was a former real supporter of the Confederacy. He's just, like, this crooked politician who's kind of on their side because he's afraid that apparently Turnbull is going to destroy his collection of 200-year-old whiskey or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, even his character doesn't even have, like, that weight of somebody who actually is from that era, someone who maybe before the war was pro-Confederacy, but then changed and isn't necessarily on board with the whole United States thing, but had to sort of read the times.
Or at least maybe a copperhead. That would have been interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really what we're saying is we could have made this film better if they just hired us.
Yes, yes, they could have. They might have.
I mean, I feel like someone with, like, a junior high school history education could have made this movie better. Like...
Yeah. Pretty much.
Because apparently the entire Civil War was just because people in the South didn't like being told what to do.
Oh,
parentheses about slavery.
Slavery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's baffling. It's fucking baffling that this movie was made in 2010. I don't know.
It honestly just feels like it needs to be set in like an alternate reality where the Civil War never happened and slavery ended in like 1779 or something.
Yeah. And then the Civil War could have just been like, the North being like, well, you should clean your room, and the South being like, I don't wanna, and then they fought a war over it.
And that's what Turnbull's mad about. It's like, I didn't want to clean my room. I'm not gonna do it.
That seems to be all he's pissed about.
I mean, to be fair, his son did get killed.
But even before his son dies, he's killing civilians left and right and bombing hospitals. It's like, what is your problem, man?
And I mean, I will note, Turnbull is killing civilians left and right and bombing hospitals in the most joyless way I've ever seen John Malkovich, perpetrate mayhem. He's not even having fun.
Yeah, he's not chewing any scenery. He's not even gumming it.
No. He's just like, well, I guess this is a paycheck.
It's weird because, Josh Brolin is, I think, actually really trying to put an effort in, and he's got this prosthetic, and the way he talks is sort of like rooted in the prosthetic on his face. And it's just weird to watch them like side by side, where it's just John Malkovich. They put a wig on him and said, say some lines.
Yeah.
And Josh Brolin was like, I didn't shave for a month.
Yeah. Seriously. I slept in these clothes. Like, I don't know.
I sleep in a pigsty with my dog.
Anyway, so that's my dislike. It's Paul's turn.
All right, Paul, what's your dislike?
Okay, we might wind up in another long conversation about this, maybe not. But my dislike is that this movie doesn't understand in 1876 or understand in general. When we're talking about alternate United States, how about the lack of any sense of geography in this movie?
Thank you.
It's like I couldn't understand half the time where things were taking place or how they were getting from point A to point B. He's working in the Wild West, then he's winding up. Then he somehow got to Louisiana. Then he's in Georgia or South Carolina.
It was South Carolina. It was South Carolina where the fight tent is.
And he's told, no, he has to go northeast. No, southwest. And it's like, and then suddenly we get from there, jump to Virginia, and the imaginary forest. Like, do you realize how long it would take to get from South Carolina to Virginia, even with
on a horse?
On a horse, much less a train. I mean, it wasn't even cheaper than trains. How is Turnbull getting around on these things? I mean, Turnbull, I'd like to know how Turnbull does his logistics in this world where he's just casually moving around the country with giant amounts of munitions and nobody notices. I mean, he hijacks a train and then nobody notices he's got this train steaming across the South. It's like, it feels like everything's within 50 miles of each other instead of 500. It's like, that's not how geography works. Even in a modern day, that wouldn't work well much less 1876. I mean, at least the Wild Wild West movie, it took time to get to places, and that was part of the plot points. They were stranded at one point in the Wild Wild West, and they were like long distance away from the action and had to get there. I mean, this movie has no sense of where is that cemetery that he keeps going to. It's like, where was anything? I could not. I mean, we see one little map of where Fort Resurrection is sitting on a peninsula, and that's about the only geographical reference we get. Everything else, I couldn't tell you where anything is from anywhere in this movie, and that's bad.
Bless you, Paul. I felt like I was going nuts watching this movie, trying to figure out where the fuck they were at any given moment, especially once the train robbery thing happens and they're like, oh, you've got 10 days. And I'm like, there's no fucking way he could even get to South Carolina in 10 days, let alone like 3 other places and then South Carolina. And
then Virginia and Washington, D.C. is like time frames and like, yeah, that just all did not work at all. I mean, even if you had an ironclad going up the coast, a steam engine wouldn't do it out quite that well.
Shit was slow. And I will also note, just like as I mean, it's like kind of a picky detail maybe, but he keeps talking about what the Crow Indians, right? Before they got forced off their land, to the best of my knowledge, the Crow tribe lived kind of like in northern Ohio, and then they got forced like up into Manitoba and like the Dakotas. So where the fuck was all that going on? Why were there teepees? How did he get to the plains? I don't know.
It's like, I mean, presumably if these are remnants of Indian tribes in the Southeast, which they aren't, because by this time they're all been pushed out by the Trail of Tears. Like, what the hell? Where are they supposed to have been? No, they've all gone. That was done decades ago. It's like, no.
And I mean, and this also does like slot in with Sean, your complaint about the sort of like aesthetic incoherence of the landscape, because you can tell what was filmed. Like, if you go look at the location list for this movie, it's like Louisiana and California, and you can tell what was filmed in Louisiana, which I guess gets to stand in for the entire South, which is a large geographic area that doesn't all look like Louisiana. And then what is California pretending to be the South? It's not good. I mean, it's pretty, but it's not good.
Granted, Louisiana is a little more diverse than people give it credit for, but I mean, it's not all bayou. That is kind of pushing the point. But I mean, there is even a roadside geology of Louisiana book, believe it or not. So there's enough variety in Louisiana to actually be able to try to make that kind of work. But yeah, I guess the Louisiana tourist would have really wanted this movie filmed there and got the denarii for it, or vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, it's visually very obvious. You get the Spanish moss kind of look of New Orleans, and then all of a sudden it's those sort of rippling hills of California.
Yeah, and you're like, the Appalachians don't fucking look like that. Sorry.
They don't. And so there is a problem here because this film, because as you said, right, it jumps between all these locations. Where there's no sense of like these things are we're filming them in a way that makes them seem coherent to each other. It just seems like what we've done is we've like contracted the United States into, to take your 50-mile example, but like basically 50 miles any direction, and that's the United States now. At least write your film so that you make sure that all of your sequences are done in a place that seems kind of like it looks like the place you're in.
Like, to be honest, I don't even need them to give me, like, I mean, the incoherent landscape makes you a little, like, it bothers you if you know what it should look like. But honestly, at this point, all I want from them is to give me some kind of, like, super title. I mean, it doesn't need to be as, like, over-enthusiastic as the ones in The Winter Soldier.
Oh, yeah, the Marvel movies, like, yeah.
Where it just tells you where the fuck we are.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I think that would probably be better. I mean, I would notice the difference, but at least I could maybe, like, trick my mind to let it go. But you're right. This film does have problems like the Crow Indian problem, which we've talked about, right? That they're, Ohio, like Winnipeg, North Dakota area before they eventually are moved. And it's like, but that's nowhere near anywhere that we happen to be. And so it's a little bit confusing just geographically of like, when exactly did he meet the Crow Indians?
And like, how did this all happen in like 10 days? It's literally impossible.
Like, it doesn't tell us, right? Like, so he meets the Crow Indians. Is it because his wife was Crow? Because we learned later on that he married a Native American woman, at least in the film.
I'm gonna say, by the way, I fucking love how their indication that, by the way, he married a Native American woman is, to my recollection, they never actually, like, have him say it. It's just they show us a shot of her where she has like her hair back and she's got kind of like some Native American decoration like in her hair and her earrings.
Yeah,
it is half-assed.
Like, okay, like,
and this is again the moral cowardice, because in the comics he does marry a Native American woman because he's raised in a tribal group, and so that it makes sense, right? As if he's accepted into that group, he would eventually marry or somebody from that group. This film obviously doesn't deal with that, and so it's an interesting idea, and when it does show up in the film, I kind of liked it because at least it softened the blow of this like magical Indian narrative that they were going with, but not enough.
Yeah, at least explain why they would resurrect him and give him new powers.
I did want to note the lady who plays it's Cassie, right? Is his wife, who never actually gets to do anything but like, I think yell his name as she gets burned alive.
Yeah,
I will note that she was played by Julia Jones, who is Native American, according to her biography.
Well, at least they got
that's cool.
Right,
so at least there's that. She was in the movie for approximately 30 seconds and then got set on fire repeatedly, so that Jonah Hex could be sad.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess we have to get to my dislike to end this show because we've been at this for a while.
Yes, we do.
I mean, we've gotten some good discussions of the various badnesses of this show, of the movie.
There is certainly a lot. One of the things I think that there's an example of this, and I'm going to have basically 2 dislikes.
That's cool. I've had 2 now.
Yeah,
or 3.
I think it's fair. One is like a historical thing, and one is related to kind of what we're talking about, which is that, visually this film is like, we're in the West, but like, it sort of feels like we're just kind of there. We're not really, there's not any effort to kind of enhance it to like, let's make it really Western, or let's make it like supernatural Western, and we'll make it super stylistic. And the example I feel is the music, because part of the music is made, it's partly composed by Marco Beltrami, who's a really good music composer, and I assume he does all of the non-rock stuff, but Mastodon is actually the band that does much of the composition for what I think must be all the rock things, which band like Mastodon doing the stuff that they did for this film is honestly, in my opinion, some pathetic bullshit, because this stuff is like, if you imagine like the 2000s, remember the 2000s, you went to go see like a movie with supernatural themes, and they would be like, we're gonna be different, and so we're gonna have some hard rock, and it'd be like, and that would be the bit. And that would be what would be different, quote unquote, about the scene. And this film does this all the time. If there's an action sequence, great. Hard rock, raw. And it's like, yeah, we're Korn, but not as interesting.
Korn, but not as interesting.
Apparently it broke Paul a little bit.
That's amazing, though.
But you're right. But I'm right. The music in this is so bizarre because it wants to go to that next level of being like, let's just be like anachronistic and let's have this, like supernatural powers don't exist. So we're in the West, but it's like the West with like modern musical stylings. But they don't even have like the courage of making it actually interesting and like letting Mastodon actually do some wild hard rock metal stuff. They just sort of like, no, we just want like some guitar riffs. They don't even have like the audacity of like at least have lyrics where someone screams into the mic something. And that's like part of, I think, what like the aesthetic is. Like they like if you get 0 to 10, they went to like 3.5 and they were like, that's enough. And this film needed to go to like 9. It had to go to that level so that at least like, yeah, the story's not exciting, but the style is really like compelling and we're just like really drawn in, and it doesn't want to do that. There's a moment when you think what this film is going to be, which is when Jonah Hex, in the very beginning, after his like monologue, right, when he goes to turn in a bounty for these 3 people, and they try to stiff him, and then they try to like trick him and shoot him, and he pulls on his horse these 2 Gatling guns.
Like, that was an amazing moment.
It jumps the shark so quick, and you're like, that's going to be the film from now on.
Yeah, that was like some Wild Wild West shit, and I was like, I am here for this, and then like nothing.
Yeah.
The rest of the film, by comparison, gets increasingly more tame. Keep in mind, the very first, they didn't start with the crossbows that shoot dynamite. Honestly, kind of weak tea, but kind of neat, fun. If that's where they started, that would have been fine, and then you end with the horse with the fucking Gatling guns. But they start with Gatling guns, and then they move to the crossbow dynamite, and then they end with him basically punching a guy. Like, they go backwards.
And they have that one little Matrix sequence, and but it's a de-evolution. Yeah, they don't save the good stuff for last. They blow it at the beginning and can't sustain that sort of level of Wild Wild Westness. Because the movie just doesn't want to take any chances in deciding what it actually wants to be. So it kind of like sits in a mushy middle of not wanting to reach out to engage in things about slavery, the Civil War, the South, Native Americans, or even steampunk, or even supernatural. It just doesn't want to do anything. It just wants to sit there like a cold, undigested lump of bad casserole in your stomach.
It's like your friend who does like half-ass effort but expects to get full praise for it.
Yeah.
That's what this film feels like. It's half-assing.
It half-asses everything.
And poor Josh Brolin isn't, and he's about the only one who isn't in this entire production.
And actually, I'm sorry, I just need to backtrack 1 minute to a geography thing that has been bothering me. and I mean, okay. It's not like geography, but it's geography adjacent. Okay, so when the train that has the weapon on it for reasons is traveling along, and Turnbull's henchmen are on it, and they show up, and they... it's the 2 guys who pull their masks down, and then they shoot some of the Union soldiers, and then they reveal that they have dynamite vests. Can someone please explain to me how the fuck these dynamite vests are connected by a line to the trigger box that Michael Fassbender has miles down the fucking track? Because I am so confused.
I will explain it to you. I will explain, because you're right, it doesn't make sense. So we're shown very briefly that the dynamite that actually blows up the car is actually on the tracks, and that's what he blows up. So when the car...
Oh, and then that makes the vests go up? Yeah. Because I was very confused.
It also doesn't make sense. Like, why do they need to be on the car then? There's no need for them to be there. They could just blow up the car.
Also true.
Like... Yeah. But you're expecting a bunch of guys who are semi-led by a crazy Irish Magneto to make sense. Okay, can I give you my last dislike and then we have to grade and close?
Yes, please do. Yes. Thank you for explaining that to me, because it has been bothering me all day.
You're welcome. I've seen it twice, so I think I have made sense of all the things that don't make sense. So the last dislike for me And it's just a thing that really bugged me from a history perspective. And I know that Paul will agree with me, but the end sequence when they attack Washington and there is just one ship, just one.
One ship of the entire U.S.
Right.
Navy sitting
the
in
whole
the Potomac.
Navy. One whole
I
Navy.
just want to point out that the United States in 1876 has already experienced the burning down of the entire fucking White House. And so there certainly would be incentive to be extra protective of the White House, certainly by sea. And also, the U.S. had a navy, so where is it? There's no navy. And the whole time, that whole sequence, when they attack the city, I'm like, where's the navy? Where's the navy? It's nowhere. Like, apparently the navy went on vacation, which also doesn't make sense because the president is literally giving a talk at the White House. It's like a big to-do, and yet the Navy is completely absent. It makes no sense whatsoever. Shockingly makes no sense given that the United States had for 100 years up to this point dealt with the fact that having no Navy was bad news bears if you wanted to protect your communities. So where is it?
I will note that there were naval battles fought for the Civil
There
War.
were.
Yeah, and it was also naval interests going on at the same time. In 1874, American vessels were messing around in Hawaii, and in 1876 they were messing around in Mexico, and so yeah.
Well, see, maybe they were all in Hawaii at the
Oh,
time.
got it.
They're all vacationing
And
in
they
Hawaii.
never left until Pearl Harbor. Got it.
1873, U.S. forces landed in Colombia with the U.S. Navy. So, I mean, that's all years before this actual thing. So, yeah, so it's not like there's like one leaky boat sitting in the U.S. Navy. The U.S. is trying to enforce the Monroe Doctrine at this point and trying to keep European powers from getting back in now that all South America and Central America are independent.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So we have this terrorista. We know he's going to mess up something somewhere because they talk about, there's 20 locations he could attack. He might attack Washington, D.C., so maybe you want to protect Washington, D.C. with some armed forces, including maybe some naval forces on the Potomac, because it is a navigable river to that point? Maybe? Crazy thought!
Yeah.
Anyway, let's pull it back in.
Let's
back
pull
onto this
back- yeah,
sad
back-
movie.
We gotta grade it. Final thoughts and grades. We gotta do this. So, Alex, your final thoughts and grade, go.
I mean, I will say that of now the 3 Western movies I have watched for torture cinema, Jonah Hex is by far the most disappointing, and in a way it's kind of showed me the error of my frustrations with Wild Wild West and Gala Walkers, because both of those movies were at least attempting to have an idea and do something. Whereas Jonah Hex as a film, a mercifully short film, is so abjectly cowardly that it slinks around for about 82 minutes or 81, depending on, like how long your credits are, I guess, and tries so hard to never actually make a statement about anything aesthetic or moral or plot or character or otherwise. It's fucking sad, and the only thing that saves it is the fact that it is so short. And Josh Brolin is trying really hard, bless his heart. So, I mean, it's really weird for me, because actually I came into this podcast not actually hating the movie as much as I hate it now after we've talked about it.
Sorry.
It's not actually that abjectly of an annoying film to watch, mostly because it's short and it's snappy and it moves. But then once you talk about it, you're like, oh no, this film is fucking cowardice, on digital streaming. So I think just actually for that, for its complete lack of any convictions at all, despite the fact that it was competently made and also only 82 minutes long, once again, I'm actually gonna give it an F.
Whoa.
Just because I want it to make a fucking choice and stick to it, even if it's wrong, like Gala Walkers and Wild West. At least they had a fucking point of view.
Alex has a solid point there, a solid case to make.
Darn tootin'.
I rest before the court.
Excellent. Paul, what about you? Final thoughts and grade.
Alex encapsulated a lot of the problems I had with this movie. The movie is a mushy middle and doesn't know what to do and want to do and doesn't do anything with it. It wastes a whole suite of actors except for Josh Brolin, who, as we said, tries his bloody heart out to actually make this thing work. But Josh Brolin can't carry an 82-minute movie that doesn't want to be carried. It's like dragging a Cadillac with 4 flat tires. It's just not going anywhere, no matter how hard you try. How many?
Mm-hmm.
The more I think about this movie, the more it annoys me. It's like, I mean, yes. I mean, this is just indicative of DC not knowing how to do movies, but in a different way. At least Man of Steel, as much as I hate that movie with the passion of 1,000 Suns, had a point of view that I hated with a passion, Superman the Murderer, but at least had a point of view. This movie doesn't want to even try. It's such a wasted effort. Like, I have no desire ever to watch this thing ever again or even remember it. I mean, if you can't get John Malkovich to chew your scenery or even gum the scenery, you're doing it wrong.
Uh-huh.
I'm maybe because I've consumed less alcohol, I'm going to be nicer than Alex and be kinder with the grade. So I'm going to give it an F+.
I mean, Paul, I just want to say that I concur with my esteemed colleague, and I feel like this movie is the fucking encapsulation of I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed, except now I'm angry because I'm so disappointed.
Yes! I've come all the way around again.
It's full circle.
Absolutely. Well, okay, so for myself, I feel like I'm going to be a little bit nicer, but not by much. And solely because I think that this film is going to be, for me, mostly forgettable. I've seen it twice, and already I just feel like in about a year, I'm not going to really remember it. Because it is so cowardly, and it doesn't want to have substance, and it doesn't want to have a point, really. It doesn't want to explore anything or think about anything or have any stylistic fervor, any of that. To me, Wild Wild West, while a film that I recognize as very problematic and not a good film, is so much fun to watch and is memorable because of the things that do make it really interesting, even when it flops and fails. This is a film that I just feel like fades into the background. It's a film that loses any of its power over time. And so for me, I have to give it a D-. I just don't think that over time I'm going to think about this film nearly as much as I might think about others of its similar genre, like Wild Wild West, or other films we have watched that I like, Twilight, which I find like objectionable on so many different levels and actively painful to the psyche. This film is terrible. It's not a good movie, but it is, I think, for me, going to be a forgettable film.
But that makes my grading math easy, so we average out back to an F+.
Correct.
Nice.
Yeah.
F for forgettable.
F for forgettable.
F for forgettable. But hopefully, listeners, you will not forget us.
I've already forgotten this movie because I had my second beer. It's fine.
Well, okay, folks. So thanks so much to our Patreon supporters for picking this film out of the list
bastards.
that I gave you. I'm still trying to learn how to manipulate our Patreon supporters to pick the film I want them ultimately to pick. And so far I have failed miserably at this mission, so it's really sad.
Your charisma rolls aren't doing very well with persuasion.
No, I have failed every persuasion check. It's terrible. So, Alex, where can folks find you on the internet if they want to find you?
Oh, so if you would like to find me and, buy my books.
Buy Alex's books.
They're excellent books. There are westerns that there's a space western that has much more of a point of view than this fucking movie.
Yes.
It's katsudon.net, so katsudon like the Japanese food, or alexaxe.com, and I am on Twitter at katsudonbury.
Awesome. And Paul, what about you?
I have my website, princejustin.com. I'm on Twitter at princejustin. I have a patreon.com/princejustin. I'm on Instagram. I'm all over the internet. I was just saying before this podcast that I had 3 podcast episodes released today that I am on. I was on a Skippy and Fanty podcast. I was on a audio podcast, and there was a game podcast I was on today. So yes, I am a very busy boy. You can find me very easily on the internets. It's not hard.
It's not hard.
Avoiding me is the trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
But who would want to do that?
Yeah, Paul's too delightful for that. As for myself, you can find me SeanDuke.net or at SeanDuke on the Twitters, or my new Patreon at patreon.com/thejoyfactory. And if you want to support this show or check out all the things that it has, skiffyandfanty.com, at skiffyandfanty on Twitter. We're also on Facebook and elsewhere. We have a newsletter, skiffyandfanty.com/newsletter. And if you want to support this show, you can do so in two ways. Leave us reviews on iTunes, and also go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty. $3 and up lets you join us for our Discord live chats, where we talk about the torture cinema film, but $1 and up lets you vote, so you can at least torture us.
God help us all.
I want something that I can hate, like, as I'm watching it, instead of hate in retrospect when I realize how fucking cowardly it was.
Yes, that's preferable to have the bile urge while I'm watching, not afterwards in regret, like, oh God, that was terrible.
Well, just you wait, Alex. The Skiffy and Fanty poll for our holiday special is already scheduled. It'll go up about a week or so after this podcast drops, and it has some doozies.
I want you to tell me what they are, tell me what they are right now, so I can send a psychic message to the listeners, so I can attempt to manipulate them by telling them the thing I least want to watch.
Okay, I have to actually pull them up, so hold on.
Yes, I want to know. I want to know what torture awaits for us.
What potential torture? Because, listeners, it's pretty likely that either Alex or I will be on that episode, maybe both of us.
Very possible.
Well, especially if it's a Western, because apparently we are the Western crew. We've all got hats.
That's true. So, Alex has demanded to know what is on the Torture Cinema poll for our holiday special, which will drop on the 11th of December at 11:59 p.m. That's when the poll ends. It drops on the 7th at 5 p.m.
Okay.
Excuse me. The Santa Claus 2.
Oh, God.
No.
Yeah, The Christmas That Almost Wasn't from 1966.
I don't know that one at all.
The Nutcracker and the Four Realms from 2018.
I don't know that one either. That sounds...
I vaguely remember it existed. That's all I know.
I feel like we could make a lot of really inappropriate jokes about that one.
Probably.
Yeah, let's not.
And the last film on the poll is Santa Claus from 1959.
I mean, I feel like the one that I want to watch least out of that group is probably the Santa Claus 2, but I feel like if... Oh, wait, no, the one that David really hates is Ernest Saves Christmas. Damn.
We've already done that one.
Oh, God, we did that one. I believe I gave it an F-. My worst grade ever for this.
Well, I feel like there is not a movie in the world that David Annandale hates more than Ernest Saves Christmas. And I was going to be like, oh, make it the one that David would have to be on. But I don't feel like he'd hate any of these as much as he hates Ernest Saves Christmas.
Okay, well, we got to stop this thing. We've been recording long enough. So thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for supporting the show. And I will just note that for the rest of this week, I will be wearing a prosthetic Jonah Hex on my face just because I want to scare my neighbors.
Do you mean like his face, or do you mean like a tiny Jonah Hex that is attached to your face?
I feel like the latter of those is creepier. So we're going to go with that.
Well, if you're properly social distancing, no one will notice.
Yeah, wear a mask, Sean. God.
That's right. I have to wear it extra large because it has to fit around his little head. Well, on that note, everybody, awkward ending and scene.
You're welcome, citizens. You're welcome.
Stay frosty. It's winter.
If you would like to support this podcast, you can do so at patreon.com/skiffyandfanty. You can also find us on our website, skiffyandfanty.com, and on Twitter at skiffyandfanty. If you'd like to send us an email, you can do so at skiffyandfanty@gmail.com. The music for this episode comes from Sphere by Creo. You can find out more about their music at freemusicarchive.org.